and welcome to Katrina's Creations. Today's episode, we are actually going to do a book review of two vintage Lion Brand pattern books. This one is from 1916, and the other one is a modern book, but they have taken some vintage styles and adapted the patterns for today. Now you might be wondering what's some of the difference other than style between some of the patterns. Looking through this, the patterns themselves, of course the yarns that they were using back then were all, for the most part, natural fibers, and the gauge was different back then, or they don't actually even mention gauge, but knitting needles and crochet hooks did not have a standardized size like they do now. So you didn't have like 5mm needles or a J-sized hook or anything like that. So some of these actually say to use a celluloid hook, which was before the invention of plastic, and another one says to use a bone hook, and some of the hooks and the knitting needles both go by numbers instead of by size or by the US sizing or the millimeters that we would use today. So that part is interesting, and they also, like I said, don't mention gauge. They will tell you the type of yarn, and the weights were even a little bit different back then, but they do not tell you how many yards you're going to need. So it's a little bit of guessing goes into these, because these patterns were written different from what we have today. So let's look through this. If you would like to learn a little bit about the history of Lion Brand yarn, they have been around since the late 1800s. They are based out of New York. They're now outside of the city, but they originally started in downtown New York. In fact, in the very end of this, it gives the address where they were at. And I actually looked it up. Here it is right there. The Lion Yarn Company. It wasn't Lion Brand. And it was on 895 Broadway, New York. So yeah, it is still around today. And it's interesting to look through. I'm going to show you some of the patterns. Of course, I can't show you the actual written part of the pattern because these are paid for. This book is available through Lion Brand, and I will put a link to it down below. But the styles are definitely different. So they start out with some like children's clothing. Like I said, this is 1916, so this would have been when the U.S. was getting into World War I. Like, look at these little booties for a baby. Definitely different from today. So I'm going to skip ahead. I do like that for a little one. Let's go look at some of the women's clothing. They even have, these are called carriage robes, because of course the car was around, but they were still calling it a carriage at that point. So I guess the baby's head goes here and you wrap this around them. You could still do that with a baby, with a car seat. I had to think what it was called at first. But yeah, you could use it in a car seat, so it would be more car seat sized. So here we get into some of the women's sizes. So these definitely do look like 1916, but they could be adapted, and you're going to see that in the next book, into some of the more modern styles. Like I said, I'm not going to show all of them because there are a lot of patterns through this book. So I do like this one, and this one I believe is in the other book, and it is modernized. But for instance, this is what the pattern is saying to make this. You need 3/4 pound of Lion Brand Lady Alice wool, 1 pair of celluloid needles number 5, and 8 button molds. So like I said, just looking at this, a lot of this is different. Now the patterns themselves are easy enough to read. You know, those haven't changed. The the abbreviations are pretty much the same as what we have now, but yeah, otherwise a lot has changed as far as the description and the gauge and everything else. So these are just some hats. This is in one of the other books. I do like this little bolero. They called it a Spencer. Here's one here. It kind of wraps around. And here's this one. This is also in the other book. This is an Empire kimono, which is pretty. And a lot of these really reflect, they were just coming out of the Edwardian age, because the Edwardian age ended in 1910. So you can definitely see some of the leftovers from that. I really like this one here. So this is a maternity jacket. I can't even imagine wearing something like that. Then we get into some shawls, and a lot of these would work with no problem for today's fashions. This one looks like it's a flipped over, like it's a square shawl that they've folded. And then they have slippers. These are cute. And here's some more slippers from that day and age. And like I said, all of their yarns at that time would have been, for the most part, wools, or there is some silk, there is some cotton in here. Here's another example. One calls for 1 pair of steel needles, number 14, 1 fine bone crochet hook, number 0 or 1, and 1 medium-sized bone crochet hook, number 4. But like I said, the sizing has changed, so we aren't really sure. All we can do is kind of guess based on how many stitches they're casting on. And then here's some more slippers. Now Afghans, when I look at these, they look as fresh today as they would back then. They have really not changed a whole lot. Here's a pillow and another pillow. All of these look like the same type of things that we would make today. Here is what they're calling a Navajo blanket. And it's funny because my mother has a real Navajo blanket and it looks actually very similar to this. And then we have some menswear. The sweater's okay. I can't see my husband wearing a pom-pom on top of his hat. But it's interesting when you look at these pictures to think that some of the men in these pictures, in fact this one is wearing an army uniform, but to think that some of the people in these pictures were headed off to war. So it's interesting looking at the styles. This picture's just creepy. Here we've got a hand in a glove, but there's no arm down here, and this person's hand looks pretty rough. Yeah, yeah. It looks like he's wearing chainmail. I mean, it's just not good. Their socks were also shaped differently. I mean, here it is on someone's foot, but look at the shape of the toe. It looks totally different than what we would do today. And then they even have doll outfits, but look at the dolls. They're the old China dolls. This actually looks like one of the sweaters that one of the ladies was wearing in one of the first pictures. And this is the same sweater without the belt. And there's another doll top. These are horse reins that are crocheted. I don't know how effective crocheted horse's reins would be, but there it is. And we even have a baby bottle cover. This is for the nipple part of the cover, so I guess it was to keep it sanitized or warm. But yeah, there's a baby bottle cover. And we have a hot water bottle cover. So it's just interesting reading this because the way they spoke back then is so different from what we would say today. Let me see if I can find an example. I was reading it and I was like, it is such flowery speech compared to what we would say today. So let me read this little paragraph. It says, although the directions herein contained have been tested in every instance to ensure their correctness, yet it may be possible that some little item may not be perfectly clear to the reader, in which event a communication addressed as below, with a 2-cent stamp enclosed for a reply, will bring the writer full particulars on any matter on which they seek further information. That was all one sentence. Yeah. But yeah, you couldn't even telephone anyone. You had to write to them to get instructions if you were not real sure with what you were doing. And then here is about the closest they come to letting you know the yardage on an item. These are some of their older yarns that they don't have anymore. And here it does say Lion brand, but this is Pansy Zether Germantown. And then it just says that it is a 4 and 8 fold. Down here, Lion brand coral yarn 2-fold. So I'm assuming that fold might have been similar to a weight at that time. It's kind of hard to tell, but it is an interesting book. There is a ton of patterns. You can see it is fairly thick here, and there are knit and crochet. I would say there's mostly crochet patterns in here more so than knit, but there are both in the book, and so this is still available. So I mean, it's been reprinted. This is not from 1916, but it is a reprint of the 1916 pattern book that they had. So now let's take a look at this one. This is a modern book, and if you remember, this is the one I said I really liked. They've updated it. So a lot of the patterns that you saw in that book are replicated here, but they have put them in modern language with gauge and with the correct size needles. So some of the patterns that are in here are like maybe from the 60s. Looking at the ladies' hairstyles, I mean, these obviously are not. Those are from the cover. And this is one of the remakes of it. It almost looks like they used homespun. In fact, they did. Yes, they used homespun for that. And here is another one here that also looks like it's been done with homespun yarn. And here is what the original looked like. And here is what it looks like when they've redone it. It's pretty much exactly, if the collar looks a little different, but I think it's because she doesn't have it buttoned up all the way. I believe there is probably another button here so this collar closes tighter. Here is one of the pictures that was in the 1916 book, and here is how they have interpreted it. I don't really care for this little part hanging down here, but that's how they have reinterpreted it. This is the one that I really like, and they have kept it pretty true to what it originally looked like. And here you can see what it originally looked like. These pages are a little glossy, so I am getting some glare, but there you can see it here. Now this one I think is interesting because of course she would have been wearing a corset, and you can see this is the one thing the vest has, this vest has changed. There was a lot more shaping in here, and it comes to a point. In the modern in the modern version of this, the shaping is there. I can see it, but it's much less. And the V that this comes down to here is not as pronounced. But otherwise, it's the same pattern. Here we have something from the 1960s. This is a little bolero. And I say 1960s just because of the little flip that she's got her hair done in. And here they've done it with a novelty yarn. So it has some little fuzziness to it. The original had some fuzzy to it too, but you can see this has like a ribbon yarn mixed in with fuzzies. The first one was probably done with some mohair. Here's another one from the 1916 book. And again, you can see that it comes to a little bit of a point here. And when you look at the modern version, they've just kind of rounded that out. So it's not as pointed. And here is another one. This is kind of it's a shrug, sort of. It looks like a shawl, but you can see that it has sleeves and it has cuffs. And here you can see that they've redone it. She just has the cuffs doubled over. Otherwise, they would come down like they did in the picture. Here's another one. This might be like from the 50s, just looking at her hairstyle, and it is a wrap or a stole. And here is the modern version of it. It looks pretty much identical. So yeah, they're both fun books. They're worth checking out. And I will put the links to them. And again, if you want to hear about the history of Lion Brand yarns, I will put a link to the video that I did. It was part of a Christmas Vlogmas that I did a couple years ago. But I will put a link to it down in the description box if you want to check it out. So thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this look at some vintage patterns. And I will see you again on Saturday. Bye, everybody.